We're back, everyone, having a wonderful discussion with Dr. Russell Blaylock, talking about health and nutrition secrets that can save your life. These neurological threats that affect our brain, our mind, our general health. And in looking through his book, I see there's an entire chapter called The Vaccine Controversy. I'd love to talk about that. Now, I know that there's just so much to do with vaccines, and as I was sharing with you during the break, and I myself have had a terrible reaction to a vaccine that forever changed the face of my health. So let's talk a little bit about your views on vaccines.
Well, what we know now is that there's millions of reported vaccine complications, and they're growing. And the CDC itself admits that only 1% of vaccine complications are ever reported.
Yeah, that's probably
so
right.
It's tens of millions of actual complications, if not higher. Now, right now in the United States, we have 1 out of every 150 births is an autistic child. If it's males, it's 1 out of 95. So this is one of the worst neurological induced diseases that we've known of. And yet they're still claiming they don't know what causes it. Well, I've done some rather extensive study in that field, and have what I consider conclusive proof that it's over-vaccination of our population. Now, while we can recognize the autistic child quite easily, there's 10 times that many children that are affected in other ways: behavior, language delay, mentation problems. They don't quite do as well in school as they should. There's 10 times that many, not even counting what we're doing to the adult population with the flu vaccine. So when we look at the number of vaccines, an average child is getting about 36 vaccines before they ever start school.
My goodness.
That is a huge number of vaccines.
And look what happens if you miss one of the cycles. You go in, and what do they do? They give them all on the same day.
That's right. And well, a lot of pediatricians even are giving children 9 vaccines in 1 office visit.
One time.
That is unbelievable.
Now,
that would make me sick, let alone a little baby.
It would make anybody sick.
Anybody sick.
Now, what people don't understand, even physicians that are giving these vaccines, they have no knowledge whatsoever of what vaccinating does to the brain.
Yeah.
Now, most of the authorities you hear talking about vaccines and autism, they talk about mercury. Mercury is very important as a causation of brain damage. But there's another mechanism that is even more important. And I've written a couple of articles on this, and I have a new article coming out in one of the journals in which I explain this in great detail in scientific terms, highly referenced article. But what happens when you vaccinate someone, it not only activates the immune system in their body, but it activates the brain's own separate immune system. It has its own immune system. It operates through a cell called a microglia. These cells normally are asleep in the brain. When the brain thinks it's being attacked, it turns on, and the way it responds, it pours out inflammatory chemicals, immune chemicals, and very high levels of glutamate.
That excitotoxin stuff. Yes, right.
And it does that in an infection for a very short period of time so the brain can recover from what damage might have been done. Now, what happens when you vaccinate, it activates that brain microglia for a very long period of time, weeks, months, in some cases they've shown as long as 2 years, from a single vaccine. If you vaccinate 9 times in a row in a little small child, their brain microglia are severely activated, and that's what causes a child to cry and scream.
Oh, it's
and
terrible.
It can go on for weeks or months. And the pediatrician said, oh, it's just the pain from the vaccine.
Yeah.
Well, that's because he doesn't understand this is what we call an encephalitic cry, which means the brain is inflamed and the child has this screaming spell because of the inflammation of the brain.
You're saying it's not the mercury in this case.
Well, even in mercury-free vaccines, you'll get this response.
Get this too.
Right.
Okay.
You see, now what the mercury does, mercury also activates microglia and does it very intensely, and mercury operates in the brain through an excitotoxic mechanism. If you block excitotoxicity, mercury loses most of its brain toxicity.
Now,
But then if you had a vaccine that had mercury in it, you would get both those effects
You
then?
get a magnification that is horrendous.
Is there still mercury in the vaccines?
In some there are, like the flu vaccine.
Flu vaccine, yes.
You see, they took the mercury out of the childhood vaccines. There's traces of it still in there.
Right.
But they took it out of the childhood vaccines, and then the CDC says all babies 16 months to 2 years should be vaccinated yearly with the flu vaccine.
Yeah.
So here they're putting the mercury back in the child.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, I saw on the news today a trailer going across the screen saying that cases of autism in California are still on the rise despite taking the mercury out of the childhood
And
vaccines. So the theory is, oh, well, then the mercury's fine. They're not a problem.
We see, I wrote an article before they ever took the mercury out of the vaccines. I wrote it in a peer-reviewed journal, in which I predicted that. I said, mercury's important, but when you remove it, you're going to find out the autism is not going to change. It's still going to go up.
And it is.
And it did, because they missed the mechanism.
Now, I know people are saying right now watching this program, but if we stop vaccinating, polio is going to come back. Measles and mumps and rubella and diphtheria, all these diseases are going to come back. Which is worse? Do you think that really would happen if we stop vaccinating?
Well, this is an interesting thing. You know, when the CDC or the proponents of vaccination want to make a case and they say, well, measles is going to kill millions of Americans if we don't vaccinate. Well, you and I grew up in an age in which there was no measles vaccine.
Yeah.
Millions were not dying in the United States from measles.
No.
I didn't know anybody in my community died of measles. I don't know anybody in any of my classes died of measles. I don't know anybody who's seriously injured by measles.
And
So
our water
it's a
supply is
false thing.
improved, our septic control is improved, public hygiene and health, food chain is all improved.
Well, here's
all
the
these
trick
things.
they use. When they use those figures, what they do, they go to Africa or the Aborigine.
Yes.
Now, when they get measles because they have parasitic infection, poor nutrition, poor immunity, they will die in millions.
Yeah.
Americans, because we still have epidemics of measles come through, it's quiet, they don't renounce it a lot, because it goes through a community and hardly anybody's harmed. And when 1 or 2 children die, they start screaming, look what would happen. Well, when you look at those children, they were all immune suppressed. All of them, or almost all of them, had been vaccinated. They were not protected by the vaccine.
Let's do this. We have to run to a break now, but when we return, let's talk about a plan of prevention. Things we could do to help protect our brains and our minds well into our senior years. That's when we return.